Hello.
Welcome back to the Space Gulag. Today we're going to be doing What If Shaak Ti Raised Anakin's Children. Before we get into this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, everyone else part of my team. Want a chance to win a free lightsaber in the giveaway? Watch the end of the video, tell you exactly who you can win. If you want to know what happened to the intro, that was entirely a marketing ploy. All those things that you saw in there, Kung Fu Panda, Megamind, those will be going up on my cinema channel, so go check that out. I've already done a couple videos on it already, so thank you for your continuous support. Let's start our story. Our story begins inside of the Jedi Temple. It was a dark night. Everything felt fine until the Force was drastically thrown off balance. Jedi Master Shaak Ti was in her quarters, meditating. She could feel the drastic change in the Force. She'd returned from Kamino near the end of the war because Master Yoda wanted her to be on Coruscant. Shaak Ti's eyes opened when she felt the massive disturbance. She couldn't place her finger on what had just happened. It was a bunch of voices crying out. She tried to piece together which voice belonged to which person. The names slowly started to come together. Palpatine, Windu, and Skywalker. Shaak Ti paused for a moment before blaster fire erupted behind her. Shaak Ti's initial response was to investigate, and that's what she did, standing up and pulling her lightsaber to her hand without igniting it. When she got out, she saw clones of the 501st pouring into the Great Hall of the Jedi Temple. There was chaos everywhere, and in the middle of said chaos, she saw Anakin Skywalker. His hand was on Sindralik's throat, and his other hand was blocking off both of Sindralik's students. Skywalker must have gone mad. Shaak Ti ran forward, igniting her lightsaber. Anakin dropped Sindralik before he looked at Shaak Ti. A chill ran down his spine. He forgot she was here, inside the temple. She was a terrific duelist. She rarely showed it since she was so often seen as a Jedi Master of peace and harmony, but on the other hand, she wasn't afraid of a duel. Shaak Ti ignited her lightsaber and Anakin stood his ground, while Sindralik laid on the ground, coughing. Clones ran by, allowing Skywalker to do his thing. Anakin stepped forward and watched Shaak Ti. She swung forward swiftly. She was a master of Form 2 and Form 4, and Anakin didn't know which was coming first. Anakin was put on his back feet, jarring him just enough for him to lose confidence. He swung forward, to which Shaak Ti parried. Instead of asking Anakin why he was doing what he was doing, Shaak Ti focused on bringing him down. Her plan was to beat back Anakin just enough to which she could sedate him with the Force until she and the Jedi could beat back the clones. She believed there was still good in him, she could feel it. For that particular reason, she wasn't going to kill him. But she needed to focus in the moment. She didn't have time to think about sedating Anakin. He was a powerful duelist, and he'd recently killed someone as talented with a lightsaber as Dooku. Shaak Ti needed to be at her best, and she was blocking every strike that came her way, leaping over a lower swing by Skywalker, and putting the Chosen One off of his game. She used the lightness of Form 2 to take away the power from Skywalker. Because Form 2 was such a light and quick form, it allowed for Shaak Ti to put Anakin off balance. He couldn't put all of his full strength into every strike because he was too busy parrying and striking at every point that Shaak Ti couldn't. Sindralik got to his feet and ignited his lightsaber next to Anakin. The balance had turned in the favor of the Jedi Masters, before a rocket shot through the air of the temple, crashing into one of the pillars near Shaak Ti. Anakin took this moment to throw Shaak Ti from her feet with the Force, throwing her under the pillar as it tumbled to the ground. Anakin then turned around and began his one-on-one duel with Sindralik once again. Blast and the pressure of the pillar knocked Shaak Ti out, but fortunately for her, she was placed under a small protective cocoon. The pillar had fallen in such a way that it didn't crush any of her limbs, nor did it inhibit her from escaping. She was just knocked out cold. It felt as if it had only been an hour or so. Shaak Ti rose to her feet quickly, removing the rubble, trying to make sure she could save her fellow Jedi. When she removed the pillar from above her, it was eerily silent. Shaak Ti looked out, and the sun was rising, and the temple was still. Shaak Ti ran over into some cover as she heard some clone troopers talking about putting some Jedi robes over their armor and pretending to be Jedi, so that they could confuse Padawans and younglings that tried to return to the temple for safety. Shaak Ti couldn't stand for this. She snuck around the temple and kept her eyes peeled for clones. When she saw none, she stepped forward. Shaak Ti didn't want to hurt the clones, but at this point, she had to do what needed to be done to protect the innocent who stumbled back to their home looking for safety. As the clones began stripping the robes of the dead Jedi, they were caught in surprise. Their helmets were off and their guns were down. They had no chance for survival. The clones saw Shaak Ti before she cut them down, screaming in terror as they lost their lives. Shaak Ti felt truly terrible. She knew each of the clones, of course she did. She spent the last 3 years overseeing all of the training on Kamino. There were some clones, of course, that she didn't know, but for the most part, every clone shipped out to the front lines after the beginning of the war, she knew. Shaak Ti disappeared into the shadows of the temple. The screams from those clones would surely alert more. Shaak Ti kept her head low and peered in and out of corridors. Every so often she would be jarred to hear a lightsaber ignite and then immediately be put out after blaster fire rung throughout the temple. Shaak Ti knew exactly what it was. She didn't need anyone to tell her or to show her, because only a Padawan or youngling would stand such little chance against the clones, especially being that only the Padawan saw the clones as all friends. And that's what they were, not more than 12 hours ago. Shaak Ti cut down as many clones as she could before she evacuated the area. She made her way to the hangar bay of the Jedi Temple. As she did, she kept her eyes peeled for any signs of anyone still alive. Still not finding anyone, she left. Shaak Ti knew that Skywalker was no longer here. She no longer felt his presence in the Force. She knew where to go. The Jedi High Council had a location far away from Coruscant in the Outer Rim that they were to go to if the Order fell. Luckily, Skywalker hadn't been on the High Council long enough to learn about this place. Shaak Ti got into her personal fighter and took off out of the wreckage made in the hangar bay, and she disappeared into space. She snuck into a hyperspace ring and vanished into hyperspace before the Republic could track her. While Shaak Ti was in hyperspace, the day on Coruscant would continue to fly by, and the near evening would come, and two other council members would arrive inside the temple. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda would find the wreckage of the Jedi Temple, and they would be very despondent to find what happened. There were no visible survivors, and it was tragic. Obi-Wan and Yoda would dispatch themselves off to Mustafar and the Senate building. Obi-Wan to fight Darth Vader, and Yoda to fight Darth Sidious. Shaak Ti arrived on Polis Massa and saw no one. Her heart hurt. She believed that some may survive and might actually come, but part of her was tempted to leave the planet. She decided to stay instead, because impatience would surely ruin it. Instead, she would focus on the Force and meditate. Shaak Ti found a quiet room instead of the facility and took rest there. The Force was so far out of balance, there was no alignment anywhere. She focused. She was trying to concentrate on Skywalker, trying to figure out why he did what he did. It didn't make any sense, because he was fine before. There was nothing to incline her as to why he would do such a thing. Maybe be angry or upset, but not a genocide of the entire Jedi Order. That was uncalled for, even from Anakin. Shaak Ti's mind took her to the Chancellor for some reason. She wasn't sure why. In her mind that he was just a politician. She never believed that he was a Sith, like all the other council members believed previously. Shaak Ti then connected the dots, and then she felt the presence of another Jedi. Shaak Ti opened her eyes and looked out the window nearby to see a Corellian Corvette, but it wasn't a normal one. It was a personal shuttle of the Senator Bail Organa. Shaak Ti knew that Bail was close with a couple of Jedi. Assuming that she would see Master Kenobi exit the shuttle, she was surprised when she saw the little green Grand Master of the Jedi Order emerge from the vessel. Shaak Ti made her way down to the landing platform and found Grand Master Yoda with Bail Organa. Yoda was warmed to see that she had survived, though being that she was at the temple, he was curious as to how she made it out. Shaak Ti informed him of what happened, and how she ended up getting buried under one of the pillars inside the temple. She admitted she was fighting Skywalker, and she had him off balance, but the clones were able to bail him out. Was it possible that she would have beat Anakin? Maybe, but overall, she was more concerned with sedating him. Regardless, Yoda explained everything to Shaak Ti, so that she was up to speed. Shaak Ti was extremely concerned about Obi-Wan. She knew he was a great Jedi, but having him fight Anakin was a terrible idea. Shaak Ti didn't necessarily think that Anakin's choice was made. To her, it seemed as if he was on edge, as if he was on the brink of turning to the dark side but not being fully evil. Yoda didn't really believe Shaak Ti to be right, but he kinda saw her point of view. She was certainly optimistic that Skywalker was not totally evil. Instead, it was he being manipulated. Though Shaak Ti's worry drifted more towards Obi-Wan, and if he'd be able to beat Skywalker. The big thing to Shaak Ti was she believed that Obi-Wan and Yoda should have fought the Chancellor. It would have been more productive if they did so. The chances are that both Obi-Wan and Yoda would have been able to defeat him. Regardless, both Shaak Ti and Yoda would meditate on the Force until Obi-Wan hopefully arrived. It would take time, but eventually Obi-Wan would arrive, carrying the Senator of Naboo into the medical facility. Once she was in the medical facility, Obi-Wan informed the two Jedi of everything that happened. Obi-Wan was under the belief that Anakin died on Mustafar, and so, that's what he told them. Shaak Ti could see how very noticeably upset Obi-Wan was. He wore it on his sleeves. Not that the burn scars written across his entire outfit said anything different. The three of them would watch Padme give birth and then slowly die afterwards. Shaak Ti had to admit that this changed everything, though she was greatly disappointed to find that Yoda was ready to exile himself. She couldn't believe it. It seemed like he was just giving up. These two children were imperative to the survival of the Jedi Order. If Skywalker couldn't bring balance to the Force, then it was obvious that Luke and Leia would have to be the ones to do so. Yoda seemed too disappointed to do it. He gave up. His greatest failure ruined him. His heart was too fractured, and he was committed to disappearing into obscurity. Yoda admitted that he had training for both Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti, but the time was not right for the Jedi to return. Yoda even suggested that either Luke or Leia be raised with a Lars family on Tatooine, being that the Emperor would never look there for them. But Shaak Ti had different plans. She told both Jedi Masters and even Bail Organa, who was looking to adopt Leia at the very least, that she was going to take the children. Obi-Wan looked at Shaak Ti. He was genuinely surprised and inspired by her diligence. She was willing to spend the next several years training the redemption for the galaxy. He had to admit that he admired it. Kenobi leaned back in his seat. He knew that Yoda wanted him to do his own training, but now he himself considered where he would go. Shaak Ti continued telling the two Jedi that she would raise the children in a remote world that the Empire would likely not go to, being that the Empire at the very least would spend the next couple years focused on the formerly separatist worlds, and then continuing her prediction with the fact that the Empire would likely focus on choking out rebellious worlds in the Mid and Outer Rim. Shilly wasn't populated enough to have a large enough voice in the greater galaxy, and likely wouldn't draw attention to large Imperial garrisons, by which point, if they did draw that kind of attention, Luke and Leia would most likely be able to defend themselves. Shaak Ti told both Yoda and Obi-Wan that they could join her, but under no means would she recede her decision. The Jedi wouldn't just wither away, and going into hiding would only sacrifice those brave enough to fight in total destruction. Obi-Wan rubbed his beard, as Bail Organa told Shaak Ti that he would provide escort to Shilly for her, and give her a communication device for her to use so that she could get off-world. Shaak Ti was perfectly fine with it, as she asked the senator if he could take her and the children to Ilum first. Shaak Ti got up and started talking to Bail Organa about why. At the same time, Obi-Wan spoke to Yoda, telling him that he would join Shaak Ti, believing that the children of Skywalker deserved to be trained at the very least. Obi-Wan told Yoda that it would be very beneficial if Yoda were to assist him in the training process. Yoda pondered, and then he shook his head. Yoda had not yet learned that failure was the greatest teacher. He was still coming to terms with the fact that he was the first Grand Master in over 3,000 years who had to watch their own order crumble to the ground. Yoda's legacy would be the training of the being who destroyed the entire Jedi Order, whilst allowing the Order to crumble to a war that ravaged the galaxy. Obi-Wan stood up and told Shaak Ti that he would be joining her on this endeavor. She smiled at Obi-Wan and thanked him for his courage, almost being disappointed that Yoda didn't have more of a fight in him. Yoda would leave for Dagobah, and Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan would be taken to Ilum. Obi-Wan would take Luke, and Shaak Ti would take Leia. Of course, these were two incredibly young beings, but Shaak Ti believed that she could retrieve the kyber crystals now and keep them safe until the two Skywalker children were ready to use them in their own lives. Obi-Wan believed that Shaak Ti was right for this belief, and so they would hold on to the children and use their connection with the children to find their kyber crystals for them. It was through this force that it would be possible. It didn't take too long. Afterwards, the four would be taken to Shilly and released near one of the remote tribes of the Shillian people. Bail would head towards Naboo, to which he would have Padme buried, and he would also discover Ahsoka there. But their interaction would be too brief for him to explain everything to her and explain what happened to Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti. On Shilly, Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan were gifted a village hut to live in. The people of Shilly were extremely welcoming, especially of someone like Shaak Ti, who was one of them. Truthfully, the people of Shilly believed that Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti were a thing, which is why they gave them the hut. And only one hut. But it was fine. Shaak Ti and Kenobi were mature enough as individuals to divide the space up evenly to share between the four of them. The issue being that Luke and Leia were simply infants. They would need constant care for several years until they could actually begin their training. Shaak Ti was a wonderful instructor. Before the Clone Wars, she spent a lot of time around the younglings, more time than Yoda did. It's part of the reason why she was sent to the cloning facilities on Kamino. Shaak Ti had a very maternal essence in the Force, and because of that maternal instinct, she gave students in the temple and clones in the facilities of Kamino the feeling of a true bond. The Skywalker children weren't hard. They were really easy to take care of. They rarely cried and they were mostly at peace. Maybe it was the dramatic beginning to their lives, but regardless, they were good children. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti thrived off of this. Truthfully, the two Jedi Masters had a quiet time most of the time. The small village knew they were Jedi, but the Jedi Masters had some demons they needed to uncover. Firstly, Shaak Ti felt an incurable amount of guilt. She could have at the very least brought the younglings and saved them in time. While she recognized that it wasn't her fault that the clones blew the pillar up behind her, she believed that if she was more aware, then she would have been able to avoid it and gotten out of the way. Beating Anakin was something she was unsure about, but with Sindralik getting up, she and him could have had a chance of defeating him, especially since Anakin was on edge fighting her. Sindralik would have been a useful ally, but that wasn't how things went. Of course, for Obi-Wan, he had to live with what happened at the temple. The memories of the younglings strewn about was ever so persistent in his mind, as well as defeating Anakin Skywalker, and the immolation scene was nothing but traumatic. Obi-Wan struggled to sleep. Shaak Ti knew this. The two Jedi were about the same age, and they both needed to be there for each other. Shaak Ti recognized that without the Jedi Order, the two of them may have to adopt less orthodox methods of understanding the Force, maybe even throwing away some of the teachings of the Jedi, because truthfully, what was important was their readiness to train the Skywalker twins. They couldn't carry any baggage into the training of the Skywalker twins. There was a lot that the two of them would have to work on together. But it also meant that Obi-Wan revealed his past to Shaak Ti. He needed to do it because it would explain some of the trouble he experienced with sleeping. Obi-Wan already struggled to sleep because of Satine's death, and being a warrior on the front lines of combat took a lot out of him. Kenobi was constantly seeing his men die, and it eventually took a toll on him. Of course, Kenobi presented himself as a strong individual with little to no faults, but everyone had their breaking points. To say the least, the loss of Qui-Gon, Anakin, and Satine kinda did it to him. The clones betraying him, the death of the Order, and everything in between didn't exactly fix anything. The two Jedi would spend their days in the Forest around the village, training with each other in the Force. They would continue a strict regiment. They would start with training in the Force, specifically, and then for about an hour every night at dusk, the two of them would train in lightsaber combat. They found it the most useful time of training with lightsabers. The only sight that they had was the Force and their opponent's lightsaber. Because both Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan were terrific duelists, they were able to be overly productive with their sparring time. Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan, as the months picked up and the years began to drift by, were able to come to terms with their losses. They functioned nearly perfectly with each other, and they were able to thrive off of their connection to another Jedi Master. Without their bond with each other, it's very possible they would have vanished into their own suffering. Also, something important to note was the two Jedi being of assistance to the village they lived in. Whatever the villagers needed, they always delivered. They made sure the people always had good food and good protection from the elements. Truthfully, having Force users as construction workers worked really well in their favor. Regardless, Luke and Leia reached an age of which, as Force users, they could actually start to understand things. It wasn't too hard either. As infants, they were really good. As small children, they were really well behaved. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti would work in shifts. On some days, Shaak Ti would show the children the Force in the way that she instructed at the temple. On other days, Obi-Wan would do the same, but in the way that he did it. It worked really well because it allowed the children to develop their own relationship with each of their masters. Because Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti were still on Shili, they didn't have any interaction with any other Jedi for years. The Empire seemingly still didn't care about Shili, and the two Jedi knew this because of their contacts in the capital city on the planet. The people that Anakin and Obi-Wan rescued from the Zygerian slavers in the second year of the Clone Wars were in contact with them. The people would keep the Jedi informed out of gratitude. At some point, while Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan were training the young children of Skywalker, they would feel a familiar presence on the world, and it would be Anakin's former student, Ahsoka Tano. She had no knowledge of the Jedi being there. She was coming back to her homeworld because she believed that she had something to gain from being here. Some peace of mind was what she was searching for. When she found Kenobi and Master T, she was surprised to say the least. But truthfully, she was happy she found them. To know that they were alright made her heart happy, and brought happiness to her. Ahsoka asked who the children were, fearing that Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan had gotten together into some sort of odd relationship. But she was even more shocked to find out that they were Skywalker's children. Ahsoka had no idea, but in retrospect, it actually made a lot of sense. Ahsoka was initially upset though. She asked how they were teaching the children. Both Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan admitted that they weren't going by the books. They were teaching Luke and Leia in a unique way, because without the Jedi Order and an ever-changing galaxy, no one knew when they would have time to act on instinct rather than code. It was a bit outside the box for the two of them, but truthfully they preferred it that way, and made them stronger duelists and even better Force users. After some discussion, they would all catch up. Ahsoka would reveal what happened to her at the end of the war and how Captain Rex went out looking for brothers who deserted the Empire. Obi-Wan was genuinely surprised. He didn't believe that there were clones that deserted, but truthfully, his only interaction with clones had been the 501st after the Temple fell, and like 4 clones of the 212th that were talking about him dying. Shaak Ti told Ahsoka that while her path was certainly by the will of the Force, she had every right to feel as if she could join them here on Shili. Shaak Ti referencing that she knew how close she and Anakin were before everything happened. Ahsoka was puzzled. She didn't know what Shaak Ti meant. Ahsoka was under the impression that her master died at the Jedi Temple, but when she learned what happened to Anakin Skywalker and how he walked into the temple and killed the younglings and massacred the Padawans and the Knights, she was outraged. She also couldn't believe that Obi-Wan killed him, all 3 of them assuming that Anakin was still dead, having died on Mustafar, instead of being saved by Palpatine. Truth be told, it was a tough pill to swallow for Ahsoka. For the past 7 years, she believed that Anakin Skywalker died as a good man, but that wasn't the truth, sadly. He died full of hatred in his heart. Ahsoka noted to the two of them that she'd heard rumors about a path for Jedi. She didn't know much about it, other than it seemed to be the first sign of rebellion against the Empire. That wasn't Saw Gerrera. It was a group of people, and Jedi, that were saving Force-sensitive children from the Empire and getting them safe passage. The Empire was reportedly stealing children from families, and then they were never seen again. The assumption was that it was for scientific projects by the Emperor, but no one really knew. Though truthfully, Ahsoka told Shaak Ti that while she was on her own journey, and she had the intention of doing her own thing, she believed that she could be of assistance on this planet. And the connection to raise Anakin and Padme's children was a driving factor for Ahsoka to actually say yes. How could she not? It was her master's children. She cared deeply about Anakin and Padme. She couldn't imagine not being there for the people he would have loved to have been with all of his heart. Ahsoka decided to stay, but quietly, being present to the kids but not being their teacher. Ahsoka wanted to clarify she wasn't going to teach, but she would be there of assistance if they needed it. Kenobi and Shaak Ti were perfectly fine with this. At the age of 7, both Luke and Leia would be allowed to construct their first lightsabers. Truthfully, this normally happened later on in their career as Jedi, but Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan started the children on lightsaber combat early. Ever since they were 4 or 5, they were using sticks made from the local trees. The Jedi were working with limited material, so it was of no use to them to use anything other than sticks until lightsabers were created. Though with Ahsoka's arrival, there was something that was consistently on Obi-Wan's mind. He couldn't help but think of the path. Not that he wanted to abandon the children, but he believed he could discover the path. He wanted to know more about how the rebellion was growing, and see if he could offer up guidance or learn the communication so he could keep in contact with the hope that was still alive in the galaxy. Obi-Wan thought about it for weeks until he asked Ahsoka where she heard of the path being. She told him that she heard of it running through Mapuzo, but that had the only reason to believe that it was on other planets. Obi-Wan told them that he would like to investigate the path for a short while to get an understanding of what was out there in the galaxy, and how the Jedi could be of assistance to the fight against the Empire. Obi-Wan also believed that it would be reasonable to go out and know what Luke and Leia would get into when they were eventually ready. Shaak Ti and Ahsoka both agreed, believing that it was a good idea for him to do so, but wishing him to be safe. Obi-Wan would head out to the capital and leave Shilly for Mapuzo. It would be a tantalizing journey for him. He hadn't been off Shilly since the Clone Wars ended, and now he was voyaging somewhere he didn't know he'd be able to find. For a couple of months, Ahsoka, Shaak Ti, and the twins wouldn't hear from Kenobi. They feared for the worst, but Obi-Wan had been on a journey. He ran into Quinlan Vos on Mapuzo, and he found the path. And he also learned about everything that happened. Vos informed Kenobi that at the beginning there was a being named Vader that hunted Jedi, but not long after that there were the Inquisitors. Of course, the revelation of Vader shocked Obi-Wan, and he decided that he would lure in Anakin and stop him once and for all. It was the only thing he could do. It broke his heart to learn that Skywalker survived all of his pain and turmoil, but surely Obi-Wan would be able to bring the attention of Anakin to him. Obi-Wan's theory wasn't wrong. Not long after Obi-Wan joined the path, the Sith Lord was informed of rumors of the former Jedi Master rummaging around in the Outer Rim. It sent Vader mad, and regardless of what his master thought, he was going out there into the Outer Rim to find Kenobi and to kill him. It would be a chase between cat and mouse until Vader finally caught up with his former master on the planet of Naboo. It was a sick choice by Kenobi, but truthfully, it was coincidental. Kenobi led Skywalker here for the sole purpose of killing him. But again, he didn't really mean to go to Naboo on purpose. Obi-Wan waited for Vader in the hangar bay, and when his Landa shuttle came in, Kenobi stood patiently. Vader was very unenthused to see Obi-Wan. Kenobi was still coming to grasp what he was seeing in front of him. Vader ignited his lightsaber as he stomped off the landing ramp. There was little to no discussion. Kenobi asked if this is who he became or how he became this, to which Vader told Obi-Wan that he was what he made him. Kenobi nodded his head and reached for his lightsaber. Vader asked if Kenobi was going to kill him, and Obi-Wan pulled his blade from his hilt and ignited it, telling his former student that he would do what he must. Vader raged forward and Kenobi reciprocated it, moving into his classic Form 3 stance. He beat back Vader with a block and then a spin. The Dark Lord was ferocious and his strikes were even heavier. Obi-Wan couldn't believe that Vader had become who he was. He was so unbalanced, filled with rage, and he was too focused on his attack that he only gave up his defense. Kenobi bounced back, switching into Form 4, the same form that Qui-Gon used to use in the same hangar bay. Vader changed forms too, keeping up with his former master. Vader's breathing and shadow cut out the light of the moonlit sky, raining in from the hangar bay. And Obi-Wan, all he saw were the flashing dials on Vader's suit, and the glimmer of the crimson blade that danced around in front of him. Thankfully, he and Shaak Ti got used to dueling in the dark. Vader struck forward towards Obi-Wan. Kenobi beat back the blade and then slipped. Vader saw his advantage and swung down at Obi-Wan's blade, beating down 2, 3, 4 times. Obi-Wan spun around, catching some balance and shaking off his shoulders. The pressure that Vader put on him was immense. Kenobi parried Vader's infamous 3-point saber combo. This was a move that killed dozens of Jedi before Kenobi. Obi-Wan threw a parry back at Vader, pushing the Dark Lord off his balance, before Obi-Wan used the Force to throw Vader across the hangar bay, smashing through some crates and landing on an N1 starfighter as it exploded, ripping Vader's cape to shreds and denting the back of his armor. But like the devil, Vader rose from the flames and stepped out towards Kenobi. Obi-Wan had been thinking about defeating Skywalker for months, all the old memories of their spars sat idle in the front of his mind the entire time. Kenobi knew at this moment that he had Skywalker right where he wanted him. Vader was losing patience. Normally he could just kill anyone by this point. He hadn't struggled this much in nearly 5 years when it came to killing a Jedi, and all that power went to his head. The same thing Anakin Skywalker did when sparring his master. Vader raged forward just enough to put himself off balance. Kenobi saw this and took advantage of it, as he parried with a strike that threw Vader's blade to the side. Kenobi swung at Vader's back, catching him enough to make Vader cry out in pain. Vader rose from the floor and turned to face Kenobi. He lifted crates into the air and threw them at his former master. Kenobi cut down some of them and used the Force to deflect as many as he could, before Vader dragged an N1 starfighter out of the bay that it sat in and threw it towards Kenobi. The Jedi Master leapt over it as the shuttle slammed into the wall on the opposite side of the bay, exploding. Obi-Wan looked at Vader and steadied himself, allowing himself to make his way forward. Vader swung at Obi-Wan again, but his swing was high and unwise. Kenobi ducked under it and beat his lightsaber across Vader's chest area. The Dark Lord tumbled to the ground in agony. Obi-Wan turned around and looked down, but before he could do anything, another Landa shuttle landed inside, behind him. Out from it came the Grand Inquisitor,
Hello.
the second sister, and the fifth brother. They were quick to ignite their lightsabers, especially after they saw Darth Vader on the ground. The 3 former Jedi moved in, and Obi-Wan acknowledged their presence. He turned around and whipped a crate at them, and blocked and parried the other 2. The second sister sliced at Kenobi, but he stepped back quickly before swinging at her and shoving her from her feet. The Grand Inquisitor was a former temple guard, and he tried his best to throw Kenobi off his footing, but it proved to be useless. The Master of Defense pushed the fifth brother to the ground and quickly cut down the Grand Inquisitor. The second sister was quick to try and take advantage of Kenobi's focus, but instead, he pulled her blade forward into the fifth brother. Kenobi turned back and cut through the second sister before turning to see Vader struggling to his feet. Obi-Wan sighed, looking down to make sure his back was covered, before he ran towards Vader, and leapt through the air. The Dark Lord couldn't do anything, and a moment later, he fell down. His life essence was gone, and he was a victim of his own decision, though finally being able to be given the peace that he deserved. Obi-Wan frowned as he looked forward. He felt the Force essence from Darth Vader, and there was none of it. Obi-Wan looked back up. The Grand Inquisitor survived. Obi-Wan sighed as he stepped forwards again. The Grand Inquisitor stood his ground, but he was ultimately no match for Kenobi. Obi-Wan would escape into the darkness of the night, leaving the 3 Inquisitors dead and Vader too. After a week of bouncing around, leaving different frequencies at worlds with planets of no population, Kenobi would eventually bounce back to Shili, to where he would find the 4. Nothing much had changed here, but when he returned, he didn't say much. He went into the forest and meditated for days. When Obi-Wan returned to the camp, he looked weak. The truth is, he felt weak. While he was able to defeat Vader and the few Inquisitors with bravery, the truth is, he was weakened by having to kill Vader again. He expressed this to Shaak Ti and Ahsoka, but Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan had done this before, and they worked through it. The pain of facing Anakin again haunted Obi-Wan, and he tried his best to make sure it didn't get to his head and wear him down. For years, the Skywalker twins would train harder, and as they approached their preteens, they got into their own respective lightsaber combat forms. Luke took up Form 4 and Leia took up Form 2, both of them heavily inspired by Shaak Ti. Her impact on the two of them was very maternal, and the truth is, while it wasn't taught to them, Luke and Leia both saw Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti as mother and father. They both knew it was adopted and they weren't by any means in a relationship, but it's truthfully how they saw the two of them. During these same couple of years, the Emperor would be beyond pissed. His rage would be felt galaxy-wide, as he began to choke the galaxy faster and harder than ever before. While originally it was a gradual process, the Empire sent garrisons out consistently, and the Inquisitor program was killed after the Ninth Sister was killed by an apparent Padawan. Sidious himself had other plans for a student, but for now he was focused on the growth of the Empire and the destruction of this insignificant rebellion. Regardless of that, the twins were now in their late teens. While the Jedi hadn't gotten involved in the war itself, the rebellion was growing, thanks to the incident that started on Aldhani and ended on Ferrix. The twins were coming into their own, and truthfully, both Luke and Leia at this point were more powerful than Anakin was before Mustafar. It was because they were trained from birth. They were truly impressive, and they resembled their parents in the looks that they had on their faces. Though the Skywalker twins were not involved in the rebellion, and because of this, the Jedi believed that their job would be better off if they went to the Emperor himself and killed him. They believed it would spark the rebellion because, truthfully, 3 old war dogs didn't want a part in another galactic conflict. They were going to kill the Emperor and allow Luke and Leia to be the next generation to take on the Empire. The 5 would spend months planning, and then eventually they would get out of their small village. They would find themselves on Coruscant. For Luke and Leia, it would be incredible, seeing a planet made out of buildings. It was a true sight to see. It was their first time off-world anyways, and it was a culture shock, but they needed to stay focused. This mission was imperative. If they could kill the Emperor, the Imperial Senate had the capacity for change. But because he was the Emperor, he was heavily guarded inside of his throne, inside of the Jedi Temple. But Shaak Ti, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka both knew their way around, and they had a hunch as to where he placed the throne room. The Jedi would spend their time sneaking around the temple, avoiding conflict to ensure that they saved what was best for the Emperor. Ahsoka was in on this too, not as a Jedi, but more because she believed in the rebellion. She believed in the redemption of the galaxy and what it needed. When they eventually entered what used to be the council chambers, they saw the royal guard and dealt with them before they entered the Emperor's throne room. He was very old, decrepit, but he was still the Sith Lord. He didn't move, he just smiled. He knew the 3 older Jedi, but he could also feel the essence from Luke and Leia and knew exactly who they belonged to. Palpatine would stand to his feet and unleash the Force on the unready Jedi, throwing Ahsoka, Shaak Ti, and Obi-Wan from their feet into the wall behind them. Luke and Leia ignited their lightsabers, but Sidious wasn't having any of it. He lifted the 2 of them up into the air with the Force, not even giving the 2 of them the chance to do anything in response. Their lightsabers flipped out of their hands and landed on the opposite sides of the room. Sidious grinned as he stepped forward, telling him that where their father was weak, they would be strong. The 2 of them whimpered in fear. They looked at each other, and then Sidious stepped forward once more, and he felt a shockwave through the Force. The 2 of them were a dyad. Palpatine's skin began to heal ever so slightly. Sidious grinned. He didn't need them, but being a little younger couldn't hurt anyone. Sidious began to drain energy from the 2 twins as they cried out for help. Shaak Ti and Kenobi rose to their feet, but when they looked out in front of them, it wasn't the decrepit old man they saw when they entered. It was the same man they knew nearly 2 decades before. He didn't have burn wounds, and from his hands came his lightsaber. Shaak Ti ran forward as Skywalker children fell to the ground, coughing. Sidious cackled as he dove forward. Shaak Ti deflected and bounced back, just as Kenobi got into range and swung at Sidious. The Sith Lord was very pissed. Ahsoka got up and made sure the twins were alright, when a red-headed Sith ran into the room, screaming. She was a little younger than Luke and Leia as she ignited her lightsaber. Ahsoka jumped up and ignited her lightsaber and swung at Mara Jade. The young Sith apprentice was Vader's replacement, and she was very impressive, but not impressive enough to take on Ahsoka. Shaak Ti flew from her feet as Kenobi and Sidious engaged one-on-one. Ahsoka spun around. Luke and Leia ignited their weapons and got up. Simultaneously, Ahsoka cut down Mara Jade, and on the other side of the room, Obi-Wan and Sidious struck each other. Sidious looked down, but Obi-Wan knew what he was doing, a self-sacrifice, one for the children. He dragged his blade up and killed Sidious before dropping his own lightsaber and falling to the ground. Obi-Wan fell back on Leia as she caught him. Shaak Ti, Luke, and Ahsoka made their way over to him as they checked in on him. Obi-Wan smiled as he held Luke's hand and looked up at Leia, who was holding him, just above the ground. Obi-Wan told them that, under a weak breath, that he would always be with them. The Force would guide them to victory. Obi-Wan nodded his head. He looked at Shaak Ti and Ahsoka, telling them that the first steps towards a greater victory had just been taken. The Force would find balance soon. It was just a matter of time. Obi-Wan smiled and then closed his eyes, and his body slowly faded away as he became one with the Force. It was a moment of clarity, and that of inspiration. The Jedi would escape. While the death of Obi-Wan would hurt, it would be a sacrifice, the first one that would lead to a greater rebellion. Truthfully, the Imperial Senate without the Emperor would halt production on the Death Star, believing that it was too far in the wrong direction, though they agreed with the militaristic approach to the Empire. They didn't believe a planet-killing weapon was at all necessary. Instead, they decided they would fund operations for Grand Admiral Thrawn, who was currently trying to put down a rebellion on Lothal. Surely it would take time, but the rebellion would be able to take a foothold against the Empire. With Luke and Leia joining their ranks, and the Empire having no battle at Scarif to lose, the rebellion would fight rigorously. Heroes of the rebellion would be known as Cassian Andor, Hera Syndulla, Luke and Leia Skywalker, Shaak Ti, and even Ahsoka Tano. The sacrifice of Ezra Bridger would remove the most threatening admiral of the Imperial Navy from the fight in Grand Admiral Thrawn. The war would last a couple of years, but would be won by the rebellion. Their fight would put a stop to the Empire and the evil in the galaxy. Ahsoka would stay with Luke and Leia, but Shaak Ti would recommend they rebuild a new order. Being that Luke and Leia only ever knew the Force and the ways of the Jedi, they'd be inspired to start a new order as well. Ahsoka would begin her own journey throughout life, without the Jedi, but she would spend time with the three of them from time to time. Shaak Ti would help bring a new order of Jedi to the galaxy for Luke and Leia to train, and then she too would become one with the Force. Luke and Leia would have the opportunity to change the galaxy for the good. The question only remained if they could recreate what both Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan did for them. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jonathan, Pim Daddy Bane, Icy Raptor, Apollo, Madman Studios, Anakin003, Spencer Bird, and Flynn Van Cease for supporting the channel. Let's hit 1,000 likes on this videos. I don't know what's coming next, but it is. If you want to see the left, below, I wrote out comments below to cross-reference, check out the Twitch community, Discord, and Patreon, and support me in other ways. For the lightsaber giveaway, go down below. If there's a lightsaber, go to the dock, click on the dock, write your name on the dock. That's how you win. I will be giving away 3 lightsabers at 50,000. We are almost there. We are literally we're 4,000 away. I've been wanting to give away this lightsaber for like months. So let's hit 50,000 subscribers so I can get ready for the next giveaway. Please, let's hit that before I move, because I'm moving in like 3 weeks, and I would really like to send out these lightsabers before I move, because lightsabers are not cheap. Also, for the intro, I know some of you guys missed the intro. The intro was, again, as I said in the beginning of the video, me promoting my cinema channel. I'm going to be releasing content on that more frequently coming up soon. Not as frequent as this channel, and same with the other channels that are on the screen. Anyways, let's talk about the story. So the beginning of the story, let's talk about that. So the beginning of the story, the whole purpose of that is to build tension. Anakin and Shaak Ti. I don't believe Shaak Ti would beat Anakin. I think it's possible that she could. Like, if they fought each other 100 times, I think Shaak Ti would probably win like 40 of them. Because, you know, Anakin is unhinged and Shaak Ti is actually a really pretty decent duelist. But I'm not trying to make an argument for that. I think Shaak Ti would just, I think that the entire part of that was to build tension. Like, oh, is Shaak Ti gonna kill Anakin here? I didn't see this coming. But that's kind of what I wanted to set up there. Now I know what I'm gonna get. I already see the comments. Obi-Wan beating Vader. Yes, yes, Obi-Wan beats Vader. He just does. And that's not a knock on Vader. Vader is like the most powerful person ever. He just can't beat Obi-Wan. That's like his kryptonite. Seriously. Like everyone has their kryptonite, and Vader's kryptonite is Obi-Wan. Now, Obi-Wan isn't meant to be the savior of the story. He kind of has a savior complex in the story, and that isn't intentional. He just happens to be the guy that fills that role. Fills a role that is the inspiration role. And I think that's inspiration from, well, A New Hope. That's the inspiration. It's like he's giving himself up for everyone else, right? Firstly, him fighting Vader is something that I think would just happen naturally if he went out to the path. If he went out to the path, I feel like you would naturally be able to fight Vader, and I feel like he would naturally beat Vader, especially 7 years in. Vader doesn't have the maturity of Vader in The New Hope, right? This is 7 years. This is 3 years before the Kenobi show. Obi-Wan beats Vader in the Kenobi show, so he's definitely beating him here, especially an Obi-Wan that's been training for 7 years. Okay, Obi-Wan, as we've come to learn, is really pretty powerful, and he's pretty dope at being powerful. So I take Obi-Wan like 95 times out of 100 fighting Vader and winning. Seriously, and even beating the Grand Inquisitor, the fifth brother, and the second sister. Regardless of that, the entire story of raising Luke and Leia, that it's always hard to do that. My best one, I believe, is for raising Luke and Leia. The only other one I've done for raising Luke and Leia is Ahsoka raising them, but that's because that story is an hour and 50 minutes long. I mean, there's so much detail in that, and I'm not trying to shy away from doing that type of long video anymore, but I am. I am, but I'm not. Doing those videos is really, really long, and a lot of people don't always watch videos that are a lot long. Just look at the Andor video or the Rogue One video that I did, or the other one. So it's not that I don't want to do those, it's just that people don't watch them, and that's fine. I don't have an issue with that, but it's more of putting stuff out for people to watch. You know, I love writing those longer videos, but if people aren't going to watch them, then there's no point in writing those longer videos, because they take a long time to write. I mean, a really long time to write. An hour and 50 minutes? That is a long video. That video, like, broke me. I swear, that, like, when I recorded that video, it broke me. But you know, for the time spent with Luke and Leia in the story, like there's only periods of time that you can really focus on them, right? It's their childhood, you know, how they grow, how they're introduced into the Force, and then kind of their teenage years, because when they're teenagers, they're kind of they can have tension. They have tension when they're teenagers. When they're kids, they don't really have any tension. You can't really do much with them when they're kids, right? You can't just like have like 10-year-old Leia go out and face Vader. That's just not going to happen. She's going to get like thrown into a wall, and that's going to be the end of that. So you have to have some tension, and that's what I'm trying to do. It's like I'm not trying to rush through it. I don't want to like rush through a story, but I'm always trying to make sure that I can cover the important details, the important parts of their growth as individuals and their growth as characters. And that's what I try to shoot for here. Is like, you know, Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti need to work on themselves before they can teach Luke and Leia. And that's the important part of the story, is Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti come to terms with their past, and they accept that their past has happened and it's over with, and then they move forward from that. That's the positivity of that. They come to terms with their past and move forward, and that's how they're able to train Luke and Leia. Luke and Leia are trained by both Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan in their own respect, so that they have a connection with both teachers, and then they both grow into, you know, lightsaber combat and Force training as a Jedi would, you know, as a traditional Jedi would, but without the code. And I try and explicitly say things so that you explicitly don't get ideas from things, which doesn't always happen because not everyone always listens to everything I say. Just look at the comment section. But that's not on me. If you miss the key thing that I specifically outlined, then that's not on me. You know, I always try and make sure that I'll even repeat sentences more than once or twice to make sure that you have the idea of what I'm going for, and that, you know, what I'm having the characters do is specifically in that particular way, not some kind of allegory for something deeper, right? So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this story. A lot of fun. I got some other stories coming out, you know, coming out. Anyways, I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, may the Force be with you.